Hello, this is Robert, and we'll be talking about prenatal development. We're going to get started off by first looking at prenatal care and its importance. One of the single best predictors of a healthy full-term baby is prenatal care. Prenatal care involves a medical exam, includes taking a look at the health history of both the mother and the biological father, and includes discussion of nutrition and making sure that the mother gets good nutrition. The medical exam is likely to include questions regarding if the mother has chronic illnesses, if she's had any major illnesses or surgeries, if she's currently on any medication or supplements, and also it would be important to let the healthcare provider know if the mother smokes, drinks, or takes recreational drugs. All these things can have an impact both on the mother and the developing baby. In terms of health history, the physician's going to want to know about such things as is there a family history of diabetes or other chronic genetic diseases as well. Finally, nutrition. Nutrition is really important, not only for the developing baby, but also for the mom. In many cases, the developing baby is going to get the nutrition it needs from the mother's body. So if the mother isn't eating properly, the developing baby will still get that nutrition, but then that's going to more severely impact the mother. So the mother wants to make sure that she gets sufficient nutrition. This is going to include protein, as well as vitamin K and several other vitamins that are needed. Vitamin K is found in green leafy vegetables, and it's actually one of the most common vitamins around, and yet because of many mothers' fast food diets, they don't always necessarily get as much as they need. And one of the impacts of that is that if the developing baby doesn't get enough of the vitamin K and it's not in the mother's body, when the spinal cord develops for that little guy or gal, it may not entirely close, resulting in spinal bifida. Fortunately, it can be corrected with surgery, but just eating healthy can cause several of these problems not to even come about. So prenatal care is important, and as shared, one of the best predictors for that healthy full-term baby. Before we go further, let's just stop and take a look at female anatomy and female physiology, just to have a background for everything else. In terms of the female anatomy, what we're looking at here is the reproductive system for the woman, and you'll notice we have an image of the woman's body here on the bottom right, and it just gives you an idea that this reproductive system is right below the belly button. And the uterus, where that developing baby would be residing, normally is just about the size of a fist. And then throughout development, it actually grows and gets larger to accommodate further development. And looking at the reproductive system, we have the vagina, and during intercourse, that's where the penis would come in, and the sperm would be released into vagina and through the cervix, making their way through the uterus, and then traveling up these fallopian tubes. These fallopian tubes are about the width of a human hair, and on either side we have the ovaries, and in each menstrual cycle that a woman has, only one of these ovaries will release an egg, or perhaps two, and then those eggs will travel down the fallopian tube. Some women can actually feel the release of the egg. It has a German name, Mittelschmerz, but not something that necessarily all women experience, definitely. And as the egg travels down the fallopian tube, it can then be met by sperm traveling up. In a single act of intercourse, the male will release several million sperm, but only about 10 to 50 of them will actually find the egg. Again, they could go in one or two directions, and I guess they don't stop to ask for directions. When the sperm are released, not all of them immediately travel down towards the ovaries. They sometimes many of them will actually stop in the cervix and then continue to be released for several days thereafter. Okay, in terms of the woman's physiology, there's two main hormones that work to regulate a woman's cycle. Those hormones are estrogen and also progesterone. So we'll first talk about estrogen. And what we see here along this timeline here is a woman's menstrual cycle starting with her first day of menses, of her full bleeding. And at the beginning of a woman's menstrual cycle, we have estrogen at a low level, and then at some point in a woman's cycle, it will start to increase. And estrogen, its job is to help prepare the woman's body so that during intercourse, the sperm have the best opportunity to reach the ovum, the egg that is being released. And so as the estrogen level increases, what it does is it actually affects the mucus and the woman's cervix. And this mucus helps the sperm to travel up, and it also does some other things. Some of the mucus acts to block defective sperm so that they can't make their way up, kind of quality control, if you will. At some point, the estrogen level will peak, and right around that period, up to around 3 days on either side, but primarily right around when it peaks, the woman will then release an egg, and the egg is released from just one of the ovaries. After which the estrogen level decreases pretty much for the remainder of the cycle. So estrogen, its job is to help prepare the woman's body so that the sperm can travel quickly and effectively to the ovum, and also to block this defective sperm. Then the other major hormone in a woman's body is progesterone. And progesterone starts to peak shortly after the release of the egg. And the job of progesterone is to prepare the woman's body for a possible pregnancy. And the way that it does this is as it starts to peak, it causes the woman's mucus to dry up, as at this point typically the egg's already been released and fertilized if intercourse had taken place. And another thing that it does is it causes the woman's cervix to close. So we talked about here's the vagina, and here's the cervix, and here's the uterus. And the cervix acts, as you will, a gateway into the uterus. And when the progesterone level peaks, it actually results in the cervix closing up. So it's entirely closed. It gets a mucus plug in it. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to take your thumb and the finger next to it and put them together for one hand. Then take the thumb and the finger next to it together for the other hand, and then put that together. So now your two thumbs and those two fingers are touching each other. And you should see a very small gap appear between those four fingers. Very small. That is the size of the cervix when it's open, and then when it's closed, it's entirely closed. Now, the interesting thing is that when the woman is giving birth, that cervix goes from this very small size, maybe 1/8 of an inch in diameter, if that big. So that when the baby is actually being born, that cervix is going to open up to 10 centimeters diameter. And as one comedian said, so that the guys could understand this, is, take your upper lip and pull it up over your head. All right, so the cervix is going to close as the progesterone level increases, and the benefit of that cervix closing is that then diseases and such are less likely to get into the uterus where the developing baby would be residing. At a certain point, if there's no confirmation that pregnancy took place, then the estrogen level will drop. And when the estrogen level drops all the way down, then the woman will experience menses. That is, the blood-rich lining within her uterus will be sloughed off, and she'll then experience bleeding for a few days then thereafter. So we have the woman's cycle start with menses, with that bleeding, that blood-rich lining that's on the uterus, so that if a developing baby does implant, there's resources, if you will, for it. And if pregnancy didn't occur, then that blood-rich lining is left off as the progesterone level drops all the way down, and then the cycle starts all over again. If pregnancy was successful, then the progesterone level will actually remain elevated, and it will continue to be elevated until the baby is born, and then it'll actually drop back down. Okay, so that's a little bit background on the woman's anatomy as well as her physiology. Let's go ahead then and get started. So in terms of prenatal care, surprisingly, most birth defects are not a result of genetics. When you ask parents, what do you most hope for this child? Typically a response is, oh, I hope that this child is born healthy. And interestingly enough, most of the birth defects result from inadequate prenatal care. For example, insufficient nutrition or exposure to drugs, nicotine, which is found in cigarettes, or alcohol. Regular drinking of alcohol can have severe effects on that developing baby. And in fact, in the text, you're going to have a chance to read about these. They're called teratogens. Teratogens is a Greek word for monster, perhaps an appropriate word since it can have such a huge impact on that development. Here is an extreme close-up, if you will, of the sperm entering into an egg. So here's the sperm with the genetic information. Here's a tail that allowed it to travel, and it's entering into the ovum. And once a single sperm gets into the ovum, a chemical reaction takes place so that no other sperm can then enter into that ovum. So only one sperm actually gets in. Well, what happens to that lucky sperm? Well, that lucky sperm, as it enters in, its tail drops off and its head explodes, releasing its genetic material into the egg, and that's the end of it, the lucky one. Okay, well, when the sperm and the egg unite, they form what's called a zygote. Zygote is Greek, which means to yoke or join together. And that zygote then is a single cell, and it's the first time where we have a material entity that represents that developing kiddo. So if we take a look at you and think about your development, the furthest back we could trace your development to where there was a single cell that contained all the information for how to make you, why that would be the zygote, that first single cell. Well, we start off as a single cell, but then rapidly we start to go from one cell to more. And again, consider the fact that you're around 5 trillion cells. This is an amazing construction process. You have a single cell. It's going to undergo cell division, so that one cell will become 2, and then the 2 will become 4, and 4 will become 8. Not exactly that pattern completely all the time, but just kind of give you an idea, kind of doubling each time. And as these cells double and continue to increase, they start to recognize where they need to go in the body, and they actually start moving in the direction that they need to go, so that those cells that need to become the eye head over in that direction, and those cells that form the hippocampus in the brain start to head over in that direction. So you have these cells that are reproducing, or not, they're dividing, if you will. They're becoming specialized, they're moving. It's an amazing construction project. So let's come back here. So we have our first cell division. That's going to be 36 to 48 hours later, so within about 2 days. That zygote undergoes its first cell division. By the end of the first week, the cell will divide it several times, resulting in over 100 cells. And you may wonder, well, what do these 100 cells look like? Are they just kind of free-floating? Do they form a long string? What do they look like? They actually look like a ball. And this ball is called a blastula. I'll go back to that prior slide in a moment. So these 100 cells, and as they continue to increase, they form a hollow, fluid-filled sphere of cells. And the benefit of this hollow, fluid-filled sphere is that the cells then receive the nutrition from the fluid. They're bathed with it both on the inside and the outside, definitely the outside. Okay, so let's go back. So we have our first cell division. We get to 100 cells by the end of the first week. As we discussed prenatal development, it's going to be divided into 3 stages or periods. It's going to be the germinal stage, the embryonic stage, and then the fetal stage. The germinal stage refers to the traveling time of this developing kiddo. Germinal actually means wanderer, and it refers to the zygote's travels through the fallopian tube until it implants within the uterus. So the germinal period represents the first 2 weeks of development. This germinal period begins with conception. That is when the sperm and the ovum, another name for egg, come together and form the zygote. And as I shared, the period ends with implantation into the uterus. So when we take a look at the female anatomy, the germinal stage is the sperm has met the ovum, and now you have the zygote, and there's cell division, and we have the formation of the blastula, and then there's implantation, that blood-rich uterine lining. And once there's implantation, then that first stage has completed. All right. So we talked about the blastula. So the blastula develops into, over time, the embryonic disc and then the supportive structures. And so imagine, if you will, a beach ball, and then one side of the beach ball becomes thicker. And that is going to then be, share the embryonic disc, where we'll have the development of the child. And then we have these supportive structures. They'll form the amniotic sac, the placenta, and the umbilical cord. So here you can see the amniotic sac, which contains the amniotic fluid. We have the placenta, and the placenta acts as a filter. It keeps the mother's and the developing baby's blood separate from each other. It's where oxygen and nutrition transfers between the two, and it also helps to filter out several different types of bacteria and so on. So here's an illustration of this at 16 weeks. Well, how do you actually know that pregnancy has occurred? There's several ways. One, if you wait long enough, you'll see changes to the woman's physiology. You can also, or body. You can also detect it with doing an ultrasound. And in fact, there's a lot of services that will not only do an ultrasound, but even record it as a video, which is kind of cool. And then there's the 99-cent store pregnancy test option as well. And if you take the pregnancy test, generally you get a medical stick-like device, and the woman, after urinating on it, it'll determine and share with her whether or not she's pregnant. Well, what is this pregnancy test looking for, if you will? What it's looking for is what's called human chorionic gonadotropin. The cells that are part of that supportive structure, they start to create this hormone, the human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. And the amount actually starts to double almost, each day. And so the pregnancy test will then detect the HCG, if there's enough of it there to be detected, and then let the woman know that the pregnancy was successful. My wife, as she was earning her PhD in reproductive biology, was working in a lab where she was actually using radiation to test for different things with their test tubes and such that she was doing in the lab. And because she was working with radiation, and because she and I were hoping to have a child, she actually did a blood pregnancy test, because the HCG levels would show up earlier in a blood test than in a urine test. And that's how we found out that we had our first little one, who is now Rose. Okay, germinal period. So, as shared earlier, the germinal period ends once the blastula has implanted successfully in the uterus. Keep in mind that during the germinal period there is a miscarriage rate of around 50% or more. And this is typically because the blastula may not have formed correctly. Keep in mind this is an immense construction project from 1 cell to 5 trillion. All the cells got to figure out whether they got to go, and they got to start linking up and working together. Or there may be an inhospitable uterine lining. So we talked about how there needs to be a blood-rich lining along that uterus, and at the end of the woman's cycle, if the formation of a new little one isn't detected, that blood-rich lining is left off as menses. So if there was not sufficient blood-rich lining, that would also interfere with a successful pregnancy. Okay, so here we have a close-up, if you will, of the uterus, that blood-rich lining that I was talking about. We have the fallopian tube, and then we have an ovary, and there's 2 ovaries, one on each side. Keep in mind that the fallopian tube and the ovary don't actually touch, though they're very close together. And in a woman's cycle, it's not just one egg that starts to make its way out of the ovary. There's actually several. If you will, there's a competition, and generally just one is released. In some cases, that we'll talk about shortly, there might be 2 eggs that are released, but that's typically it. And so the egg is released from the ovary, and then it's pulled towards the fallopian tube and continues its journey, and then not that far into the fallopian tube, fertilization, if intercourse is taking place and there's release of sperm into the woman's body, would take place. Several million sperm, only, as I shared, about 10 to 50 that find their way to the egg, and only one of them that gets in. And then instead of having an egg and sperm, we have a zygote. The zygote begins its travels down, and we start to see cell division and the formation of the blastula. And over here we have the embryonic disc, where the cells are more dense, and then we have the implantation, and then that wraps up the germinal stage. So we're talking about if more than one egg is released. If more than one egg is released, that's referred to as, and both of them, not only is it that more than one egg is released, but that both of them are fertilized. Each of them would be fertilized by a different sperm. And in that case, we'd have fraternal twins. So occasionally 2 eggs may be released. When this occurs, each of the 2 eggs can be fertilized by a different sperm. Another possibility is identical twins, also known as monozygotic. Mono means one, and then we're talking about zygote, meaning that the sperm and the ovum have combined into a single cell. So monozygotic, one zygote. So in rare cases, where the zygote first divides, the 2 new cells may become separated from one another. So instead of sticking together, we have cell division, and then they split off, and then each of them continue its splitting or cell division. And in that case, it's amazing. We have then these two new, developing kiddos, and each of them are, if you will, following the exact same blueprints, right? Because our DNA are the instructions for our development, and so now instead of having one, you have these 2 entities, and each of them following the same genetic instructions. All right, well then our next stage of development, we're now at the 2nd stage, is the embryonic period. And this is development from weeks 3 through 8. And the main thing that's happening in the embryonic period is we have the differentiation and development of the major organs. So we start to see all the major body parts being formed and becoming unique. And then later on in the last period, the fetal period, we'll see them being connected up, if you will, more. So here's from your family photo book, if you will, what you look like at 5 weeks in development. Well, what happens in this stage? So I shared that you start off with this happy bouncing ball, a blastula, and we got to get from a happy bouncing ball to, well, to the way you look now, right? And the way this takes place is that bouncing ball, if you will, the blastula, starts to elongate and forms a tube-like structure. So we go from a ball to a tube, And this tube is referred to as the neural tube. The neural tube has these three main layers. There is the ectoderm, that's the outer layer, and this will later continue its development into your skin and sense organs like eyes and nose. Then you have the mesoderm, which means the middle layer of the tube, and that's going to form into your muscles and your blood and excretory system, that is in terms of using the restroom. And then the inner layer on the inside of this tube is the endoderm, and that will form such things as digestive system and lungs. And so you go from the bouncing ball, if you will, to the neural tube, and this neural tube essentially it's patterning your spinal cord. And so as the development continues, we'll see the development of a brain on one end, and then the development of the head and everything, and the arms and the legs. So, you know, imagine you're building a structure in space and it's free floating, right? So you go from the sphere to the long tube, and then from this tube you build outwards. So our spine, if you will, our spinal cord is that starting point. Okay, by the second week of the embryonic period, or 4 weeks following conception, we have amazing things going on. The heart is already beating. A primitive nervous system is functioning, and by the second week in your embryonic period of development, you were 1/4 of an inch in length. So a pretty small dude there, but at least you had a beating heart. By the end of the embryonic period, again, a lot has been accomplished. A sense of touch has developed. Movement is possible. By the way, this is at 5 weeks. We're now talking at 8 weeks. The internal organs are developing, and external body structures are developing. Face, arms, legs, toes, and eyes. By the way, since this is a recorded video, you can always pause the video as well as fast forward and rewind. Okay, some challenges to the development. So miscarriages can continue to result. As shared earlier, they can result from the support cells inadequately forming either the placenta or the umbilical cord. It could also be an inability of the blastula, remember that's used as the happy bouncing ball, to implant in the uterine lining, or the embryonic disc may inadequately form into the embryo. So all those would then lead to an unsuccessful pregnancy. If miscarriage is going to occur, most of them occur by 12 to 13 weeks. And certainly by 20 weeks thereafter, it's really rare. So keep that in mind in terms of sharing your news. Okay, then we have the third and final stage or period, if you will, for prenatal development. So we have the first stage, germinal stage, then we had the embryonic stage, and now the fetal stage. Germinal stage was traveling from the ovary to the uterine lining. The embryonic stage was, an embryo by the way just means swelling, because there you were, a swelling on the uterine lining for a while until you started to free float. And then in the embryonic stage we had the major organs form and the cells start to differentiate. In the fetal period, now we're going to have connections. We're going to start making more and more connections. So many of the major organs and external body structures already existed as you came into this stage. We're going to see a rapid increase in size. And again, the nervous system, organs, and muscles will become much more connected. And this fetal period is going to be the last 7 months of the pregnancy. So that's it. And then, 7 months later, total of 9 months later, you're born. It's amazing when you think about how long pregnancy takes. For us, it's 9 months. You think, wow, it's a lot, and it is. But for an elephant, it's actually close to 2 years. For a mouse, it's a month or so. So lots of variability out there. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the key things that are happening during each month of the fetal period. And your textbook lists several things, so I'm just kind of picking out some of the highlights. So at third month, you have development of the kidneys and pancreas. The liver and stomach begin to function, and also the sexual organs are complete. So if the couple or the woman herself goes in for an ultrasound of that developing baby, by the end of the third month, typically it's possible to determine whether it's a developing boy or developing girl. For the developing boy, you're looking for signs of the penis. For the developing girl, well, when my wife and I went to our first ultrasound appointment with our first child, and continued till we got to this third month, you know, I remember them asking us, well, do you want to know the sex of your child? And we're like, you know, no, not in particular, but if you happen to find out, you know, that would be great. And so, you know, they did the ultrasound with my wife, and they said, well, you know, the little dude's legs are crossed, so we can't tell, you know, if this is a boy or a girl, you know, but maybe, you know, if your wife gets up and walks around, you know, that might change the child's position, and then you would know. So, you know, Carolyn decided that, yes, you know, that sounded interesting, so she walked around, and then they did the ultrasound, and they said, oh, well, you know, you're expecting a little girl. Well, my wife has a sister who was quite expecting a little girl, and a little guy that was born, and that's wonderful, but she had, you know, bought all the clothes for a little girl, painted the room pink, and, you know, all the things that, you know, so, you know, my wife's like, well, you know, how can you be sure about this? And the ultrasound technician said, well, you know, for the girl, you're actually looking for, she described it as a hamburger pattern, you know, like 3 lines, so that for the boy, you're looking for a penis, and for the girl, you're looking for these 3 lines at that point. And all I can say is, you know, we have 5 kiddos and 1 on the way at this point, and they've been right every time, so they must know something of what they're doing. Okay, 4th month, the body becomes longer, the heart beats faster. 5th month, development of a strong hand grip. And you may wonder, well, where did that come from? Pretty cool photo of that. I'll show you later on. Also, mother can feel the baby's movements typically in the 5th month. The 6th month, we see amazing development with the brain. Brain increases 6-fold in size, and now the brain waves can be detected. That is, there's enough neurons firing together in the brain that with an EEG, we can actually measure it through the mom's body. So this was actually a picture that appeared on Time magazine. It was an amazing event where there was this little dude developing in the uterus and had a spinal bifida. I mentioned that can result because the spinal cord doesn't completely close, the tube doesn't completely close. Typically, it can be a result if the mom doesn't get enough vitamin K. And so they actually decided to treat this with surgery. And so you're looking at the womb, and they've made an incision, and they went in. The surgery was a success, and you know, but here's this little dude with his hand, a firm grip right here, and of course, you know, they're not going to take him or her out at this point because, well, quite frankly, more time is needed to be fully ready and going. But amazing what's possible there. So by here's an important term to be aware of, age of viability. By the 6th month, the 24-week-old is viable outside the womb. So at 6 months, we have viability. And what does viability mean? Viability means that there's at least 50% chance of survival as early as 24 weeks. Now, if born at that age, and even if survival occurs, there's likely to be a lot of impairments and such that may be faced. So the more time within the womb, obviously the better. You know, going at 24 weeks, there's a 50% chance of survival. Just 1 week longer, just 7 more days, and chance of survival goes to 80%. 4 more weeks, so by 29 weeks, chance of survival goes to 90%. So, you know, while we could conceivably, in an emergency situation, deliver a 24-week-old, going longer is definitely much more beneficial. Okay, 7th month. So 7th month, the nervous system can handle breathing and swallowing. Keep in mind that this little guy or gal is free-floating in amniotic fluid. And so breathing actually means bringing amniotic fluid into the throat and into the lungs and back out again. And why is this not a problem? Because all the oxygen and nutrition comes from the umbilical cord. In fact, it's pretty cool. A baby, a mom can labor in a water pool, and warm water, we'll talk about this, can actually help her to have a much more positive birth experience for buoyancy, increasing pain threshold, helping her to relax. And the baby can actually be born into this water and be just fine because the baby's continuing to get that oxygen from the umbilical cord until it gets cut or shortly after the birth. So in utero, the nervous system can handle breathing and swallowing, but it's practice. Also, 7th month, the brain structure is developing with localized centers to handle various senses and motor activities. So at this point, clear evidence that there's experience of touch and pain and sound and bright light. You may wonder, how do they know about bright light? Because they actually record what these guys do when a bright light is shined in their face. You know, like, hey, get it out of my way. And they're moving away. 8th month, eyes open, vision is possible, and also a layer of fat develops to prepare for post-birth. You know, while within the womb, you have the mother's body temperature. Not a lot of variation, but you do need that fat, if you will, the insulation for subsequent birth and out there into a potentially cold world. Okay, the 9th month. So at this point we have development of the sleep-wake cycles, and this does not mean sleep 8 hours and wake up 16. Actually, as we'll talk about later, the newborn sleeps on and off throughout the entire day, about 16 hours a day, but again spread all around the clock. Also, 1 to 2 weeks prior to birth, the baby rotates with the head facing the pelvic region, and the cervix lowers into the pelvic region. So 2 weeks, the baby flips over and is upside down, and if not, the doctor will want to help the baby with flipping to be head down, and that will help then with the birth and the baby's head then going out through the cervix and through the vagina. Okay, I mentioned trimesters here because that's often used, but keep in mind that for our course you definitely need to know about the germinal, embryonic, and fetal stages, when they start, when they end, and what happens within them. But just to kind of connect this with your understanding outside the course, in the first trimester the basic structures are formed. In the second trimester we have maturation of the organs, particularly the brain, in preparation for survival. And then in the third trimester we have the connections of the different organs in the body, extensive brain maturation, and system rehearsal. System rehearsal is kind of the breathing in and out of the amniotic fluid, not directly needed for survival within the womb, but rehearsal for what's going to be needed outside the womb. All right, hope you found this informative, interesting, and useful, and I look forward to seeing you all later. Take care.